Amen. Let's go to the book of Job. Um, as I was thinking about what to teach on Thanksgiving week, my mind kept going back to Job because, from a worldly perspective, he had every reason to be bitter, and he really wasn't. And Job is an interesting book along many perspectives. One of them is the lessons that we can learn from Job, and I think probably I've just scratched the surface, but I scribbled down some lessons, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Another thing, and this I learned more from the commentaries than looking into the book of Job myself, was that, and although one of the things I noticed in doing the work in Job that I did was the number of various translations. Holy smokes. If you went to a Bible study where you were studying Job and 5 or 6 people had different translations, you could wonder if you were in the same book. Some of the translations are so different. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is that the vast majority of Job is Hebrew poetry, and Hebrew poetry by its nature leaves you to fill in a lot of words. Hebrew poetry is not like Hebrew prose where you get complete sentences. Hebrew poetry is like American poetry. The sentences are incomplete. The concepts are not exactly applied. You know, when you're poetic, you stretch the meaning of words, you bend the meaning of words in unusual ways. So you've got those two problems. Plus, Job has the largest number of unusual words of any book in the Bible. So many unusual words, in fact, that there are scholars who say that the book of Job was probably written in another language and then translated into Hebrew. Now, I think that's been ably defended by Hebrew scholars, but that does show you it's just got these words that occur and you're like, what exactly is he meaning by this? So there's a lot of I'm going to say, kind of eisegesis in Job, where you're kind of reading into the text a little bit to see if you can fill in the blanks. So that's one of the reasons. I don't know what Bibles you all are reading out of. I'm going to be reading out of the REV. If our Bibles differ, then you will understand why. And it's worth taking a look at the Hebrew and the commentaries to find out what they say about that. So let's talk about some of the lessons, and this is just some of the lessons we can learn from Job. And I think this, again, fits under this overarching field of just being thankful. One is that innocent people suffer in a fallen world. And this is certainly Job. Job is often called the righteous sufferer because he was innocent. He was a blameless man. He held to what was right and he avoided evil. And yet he had terrible things happen to him in life. And it wasn't his fault. And that's something that, if we can really wrap our heads around that, it really helps us be empathetic for other people, because there is often no reason, no discernible reason why someone is suffering. They get sick, they get a disease, they're in a car wreck, something happens, you know, it could be any kind of thing, material, physical, financial, that happens to them in a fallen world. The people are often simply innocent and there's no discernible reason for what went wrong. And as we wrap our heads around that, then it helps us be empathetic to others and enter any situation where a person is disadvantaged with questions about what the situation is and how can we help, rather than a prescription. You should have done this, you could have done this if you'd only done that, things about which we actually honestly don't know. Second thing we see from Job is you can be thankful in any situation. When I look at Job and the situation that he was thankful in, you know, we've always got, and it was again stated in manifestations tonight, that we have the hope of the return and the hope of everlasting life. We always have something to be thankful for, and usually we have quite a few things to be thankful for. So that's something we can focus in on. Another lesson in Job is that Satan is a liar. He lies and he incites people to evil. Um, and furthermore, Satan, one of the lessons is Satan will never admit that he's wrong, even when it's very clear that he is wrong. And by the way, that applies to Satan's people. One of the things, when we look at the Bible and we're saying, what lessons do we learn from this? What can we take home from the Bible? And Christ looked at the Pharisees in John chapter 8 and he said, you are of your father, the devil, and the works of your father you will do. Satan will never admit that he's wrong, and Satan's people never admit that they're wrong. They're always going to shift the blame. We need to be ready for that. Another lesson we learn from Job is that good people can be very wrong in their theology, and because of that, they can be very harmful as a result of that theology. A personal incident in my life was when I believed in the law of believing, and then when somebody was in a disadvantaged situation, I immediately thought it was their fault. If you could believe, if you could have faith, then all these things wouldn't happen to you. It's simply not true. It's a hurtful theology. I was a good person, but the theology that I held put me in a situation where I was actually hurtful, not helpful. And we need to be aware of that as Christians, and as Christians who are ministering, who are witnessing to others, who are under shepherding others in the faith, that people may have friends that have influence over them, and those people are good people, but they have a bad theology. And so in that situation, they are hurtful people, and they need, and innocent victims need to be able to understand that, take a stand and say, look, you're a good person, but right now your theology is hurtful. I don't need you in my life. We need to be able to draw some boundaries and some borders. We need to be able to excuse ourselves from the situation when we're around good people who have a hurtful theology that therefore become hurtful. Another thing we need to learn from the book of Job is that when we're in a difficult situation, we can have irrational emotions, and people around need to simply understand that and let them go. You don't make an issue out of it. You don't press into it. You don't ask why it's there. We know why it's there. God created us in his image. He's an emotional being. When we're in a surprisingly disadvantaged situation, we often have emotions that are not rational. We let it go. It does show up in the book of Job. One more thing we need to be aware of from the book of Job, it's less of a lesson than it is an understanding of theology. In the book of Job, as we will start reading in Job chapter 1, it sounds like God is making a deal with the devil so that the devil can hurt an innocent people. That person, and that person, of course, is Job. That is not within the scope of what God does. God does not do that. The Bible is very clear. In James, for example, every good and every perfect gift is from God. We know from the New Testament, God is love, that God is not harmful, the devil is harmful. What we have in the introduction, the introductory 2 chapters of the book of Job, is something that's very akin to the idiom of permission, where an Old Testament person would understand that God was supposedly in control. We today have the New Testament, and we read the Old Testament in light of the New Testament and understand that what God is doing, God, in many cases in the fallen world, cannot stop the devil from doing evil. So, for example, let's take the years of famine in Israel. When Jezebel was reigning, there were prophets of the groves, there were prophets of Baal, there was all kinds of evil. And because of that, there was a famine in Israel that lasted over 3 years. Many innocent people were hurt in that famine. They themselves didn't do anything that would cause that harm. But the Bible would say something like God called for a famine or something like that. when in reality, that's like an idiom of permission. That's what's going on in the opening chapters of Job. So with those lessons, let's go to Job chapter 1 and take a look. So the scripture starts out and says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and turned away from evil. Let's get some time period. Time period, we believe, is approximately the same time as Abraham. We get that from the names, from the locations, from what was known and not known about God during the time of the book of Job. I'm going to share my screen just a little bit here. And when it says there was a man in the land of Uz, as far as we can tell, here's Edom here, and then this would be Moab, and then Ammon. Well, Moab is here, Ammon is here, and then up into Gilead, here's the Dead Sea. As far as we can tell, Uz was somewhere in this area right in here. So this was where Uz was. By the way, Timon is going to be down in this direction. So when the Temanite comes, Eliphaz, he's going to be coming from the south. So anyway, so that I'll stop sharing. So that gives you an idea of where Job was coming from. Now, I don't believe the name Job was his birth name. As far as we can tell from the Hebrew text, the word Job means attacked or persecuted. So literally, when we read the book of Job, it's the book of the attacked one. I believe that Job got the epithet Job. He was called the attacked one after he had gone through all of the trials and tribulations that are in the book of Job. And then as he came out of the other side and he had more children and got more flocks and herds and that kind of thing, then people would look at him and go, oh my gosh, look how prosperous he is. He was the attacked one. He was Job. And so that's, interestingly enough, if you're reading the Hebrew text, then when it says the book of Job, you go, oh, it's the book of the attacked one. And then you kind of already know what Job is going to be about. You're just kind of watching and waiting for the attack. So here's Job. He was blameless and upright. He feared God. He turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters, and this makes a really wonderful, happy family. 7 being spiritual perfection, 3 being the number of completeness. So he's got this wonderful family. Verse 3, his possessions also were, and now it's going to give us round numbers, and obviously round numbers, we understand why, because if you've got a whole bunch of sheep and animals, they keep having more sheep and animals, and you keep eating sheep and animals. So the number is different literally every day. So his possessions were 7,000 sheep. By the way, the word for sheep here includes goats. So, I mean, it's one Hebrew word. So, you could go 7,000 sheep and goats, but anyway, the word sheep includes goats. It's just his herds. 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 1,000 oxen called a yoke here because they would work together. 500 female donkeys, because the female donkeys were important. They were the ones that would give birth and build the herd. You didn't need nearly as many male donkeys. And a very large number of slaves. Some of the versions will simply say a large household, but it's clear from the Hebrew text that we're talking about slaves. By the way, many of the translation read servants. It's very difficult. Jerry and I just had a conversation recently about how to translate the Eved in the Hebrew and the doulos in the Greek, because especially in the biblical household, the slaves weren't treated exactly like the black slaves were in the United States. On the other side of the coin, they weren't just servants. They weren't free to just say, well, you're not paying me enough, I'm leaving. They were slaves. They were part of the household. They were owned, if you will, by the master, in this case, Job, no matter how well they were treated. But that's what this is talking about. So he's got sheep, camels, goats, oxen, female donkeys, a very large number of slaves. So he was the greatest of all the children of the East. Greatest, of course, meaning the most prominent or most powerful, because in those days, as still sometimes in modern times, power is determined by the strength of the men that you can field in an army if you're ever attacked or need to attack someone else. Verse 4, his sons used to hold a feast, and the Hebrew text here refers to something that went on regularly, each in his house on his day. Some of the scholars suggest this is his birthday. So with 7 sons, at least 7 months out of the year, you'd have a birthday feast. I don't know if there's any way to exactly prove that, but in any case, the feasts were regular. And then it says, and they would send and call for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And so they would get together as a family, generally once a month or a little less. Verse 5, and when the days of their feasting had run their course, because in that time period before refrigerators, if you killed an animal, then you wanted to kind of keep things going and keep eating it. It wasn't just, a couple hours and then you'd leave. And so here, when the days of their feasting had run their course, Job would send and have them ritually cleansed. We don't really understand why this is. We'll read on. It says, and he rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. So 10. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Job did this regularly. So there's a lot going on here. We don't really understand what Job thinks that his children could have done that they needed to be ritually cleansed, except he said they may have sinned and cursed God in their heart. Then also when it says he rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings, that's an idiom that's very hard to translate into English, because it doesn't literally have anything to do with him rising up early in the morning, which is a bit of a challenge, because that's what the text says. That's the idiom. He rose up early in the morning. But what it really refers to is he's very diligent about it. And that's, you get people that get up early in the morning, they're diligent. Some of the translations even go that way and say that Job was diligent. And furthermore, generally, when you rise up early in the morning, you do something regularly. So the literal idiom is he rose up early in the morning and offered offerings. What the meaning of the idiom is that Job was diligent to offer offerings, and he did it over and over again. So that's what's being stated here in the Hebrew text. Very hard to bring that whole paragraph out into English when all the Hebrew idiom says is rose up early in the morning. And then he said, it may be my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Job did this regularly. Something else we need to be aware of is the word heart in the Hebrew understanding could mean your mind or your thoughts. When you and I read cursed God in their hearts, we think, wow, they've cursed God in the depth of their being. That's not necessarily the meaning of the Hebrew text. Job simply may have been thinking that while they were feasting and having a good time together, I don't know what actually happened over there. One of them may have thought of, in their thoughts, may have cursed God. So that would be part of the semantic range here. I know that's a lot of kind of background on this verse, but sometimes we can read things into the text that we don't want to read into them. So verse 6, now we get a background then about Job and how rich he was and his family and what good care he took of his family as the family priest. So verse 6, and one day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, Satan also came among them. Now at this time, the word Satan just means adversary. And at this time, Satan as a being in charge of a evil spiritual kingdom was not really understood. What was understood was that if a person had a whole lot of children, it just happened regularly that one of them was an adversary. Lots of our families have that today. You have 4 or 5 children, and one of them turns out to be kind of a pain in the tail. They just seem to cause trouble. They're always needy. They're always asking you for stuff. They're always getting in some kind of trouble or other. They come to family gatherings and cause trouble and stir up fights, and they're just adversarial. And so the way that the Hebrews thought about life in the Old Testament was that God was God and he was the Father, and he had fathered spiritual children and physical children. And the phrase Son of God, B'nai Elohim, refers to his direct creations. And so God, like so many families, had a lot of children, and one of them was adversarial. And that lots of the families had experienced that personally. So that was easy for them to understand for God. It would be centuries later, in fact, maybe even millennia later, before the Jesus Christ would come and reveal Satan as the kind of top bad guy in an evil empire that has suzerainty over the earth and is the God of this world. So Satan shows up, the adversary shows up. Verse 7, Yahweh says to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Then Satan answered Yahweh and said, and I like this because this is a typical prevarication. A prevarication is when you say something true, but in saying it the way you do, you hide what you're actually doing. And so he says, where have you come from, says God. Satan answered Yahweh and said, from going back and forth on the earth and from walking up and down in it. Now we know from 1 Peter 5:8 and various and sundry other verses that Satan is on the earth, but he's causing trouble everywhere. He's seeking whom he may devour. He's oppressing people. He's not going to reveal that. It's like, so Satan, where have you been? Oh, just kind of wandering around on the earth. It's like, no, you're a liar. You're telling us where you were, but not telling us all about where you were and what you were doing and why you were there to cause trouble. So anyway, and it's interesting that 1 Peter 5:8 says basically the same thing about walking on the earth, seeking whom he may devour. Verse 8, Yahweh said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there's none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and turns away from evil, which was true of Job. He was an innocent man. Then Satan answered Yahweh and said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him on every side and around his household and around all that he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his livestock is spread out over the land. Well, look how many livestock he had. A couple interesting things about this. One is in our modern Christian parlance, we talk about a hedge of protection. This is where we get that. There's that Christian comedian that's made fun of that, which was a really cute little skit that he did where Satan's coming to attack somebody and they built a hedge of greenery around it. Oh my gosh, greenery. Can't attack somebody who's hiding behind greenery. And it's a cute little Christian comedian skit. But in any case, here the Hebrew word hedge is importing kind of the idea that God is the great shepherd and Job and his family are some of the sheep, because the Hebrew word implies a hedge made out of thorn bushes, which is what the shepherds would do for building their sheepfolds in many, many cases. Even if they built a rock wall as the foundation, they would usually put some kind of interwoven thorn bush hedge around the top of it, or sometimes just interwoven bushes in a kind of a hedge or a circle, interwoven thorn bushes to keep wolves, foxes, various intruders out. And so this is a thorn bush hedge. Have you not made a hedge of thorns, if you will, around him on every side and around his household and around all that he has? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his livestock is spread out over the land. And of course, God had blessed Job, but on Job's part, he was blameless and upright and turned away from evil. So he was a man that made good decisions and worked very wisely. Verse 11, but stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and surely he will curse you to your face. And of course, when this doesn't work out, Satan never comes back and says, wow, I was wrong. But in this case, here we see Satan, and like I say, it sounds like Satan is inciting Yahweh to do evil. Yahweh does not operate that way. He doesn't make bargains with the devil just to see if some innocent person will break under the pressure. This is very akin to an idiom of permission. By the way, something you should be aware of when it says, surely he will curse you to his face. The word curse is the word bless in Hebrew. And that is true in a number of places around the scripture. And if you're just reading it in a linear and you're not aware of this, you might become confused. But the word bless was used to mean curse as well as bless. And you have to determine from the context whether to translate the word as bless or as curse. The same word means the same thing. There's a philological reason for that, but enough to be said that if you were looking at a Hebrew linear and it said or bless, or you'd be looking in Bible Works or something like that, and you go, well, I don't understand here. Why does it say he'll bless him? The same word is used for a curse and a blessing. Here it refers to a curse. So verse 12, so Yahweh said to Satan, this adversary, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not stretch out your hand against him. And this becomes important in chapter 2, leave his body alone. So Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh. So now what we learn from the book of Job here is that Satan is the one who causes the problem. God is not. People are quick to point out, well, God gave him permission. In this case, yes. This is why I say this is very similar to the idiom of permission, like God hardened Pharaoh's heart, that kind of thing. But it is Satan who is actively going out and doing evil. So verse 13, now one day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, that a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding nearby them, when the Sabaeans attacked and took them away. Yes, they have struck down the servants with the mouth of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The phrase mouth of the sword is very literal, and it was a way of communicating that it's like they were so ruthless in what they did and in killing everybody. It was like the sword was just eating people up. So that's the idiom, that they struck the servants with the mouth of the sword, and I'm the only one who's escaped. Verse 16, while he was still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God has fallen from heaven and has burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. So here, fire has devoured up the flocks and herds. Now, I believe this is another idiom, because the word God is often used adjectively in the Hebrew for something that is a superlative. A great fire is a fire of God, for example. We know that the herds had sprout out all over the land. Often in the text, the fire of God from heaven is used of lightning, but it's very unlikely that lightning came down and struck over such a wide area that it killed all these sheep and cattle and things like that. It makes more sense that what you've got here is something more akin to a great fire, an extensive fire has fallen from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And poor Job, he's reeling from these things. In verse 17, while he was still speaking, another also came and said, the Chaldeans, and they're coming from southeastern Babylon. The Chaldeans formed 3 bands and swept down on the camels and have taken them away, yes, and have struck down the servants with the mouth of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. So the servants who were attending all these camels, they were killed off also ruthlessly. Verse 18, while he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, when suddenly a great wind came from the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they're dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. So this is basically Job at this point has basically lost everything. He's lost his flocks, he's lost his herds, he's lost his servants, that great number of servants in his household, and he's lost his children. And so then verse 20, and this is a very appropriate cultural response. Verse 20, then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, fell down on the ground and worshiped. And fell down on the ground and worshiped means bowed down in a posture of worship. Verse 21, he said, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I will return there. Yahweh gave and Yahweh is taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. And that you just got to wrap your mind around that. You know, at my age, I've worked very hard to have what I have. And, you know, I have a nice car, and my house is paid off, and I have some nice clothing, and well, at least I like the clothing, you know, and some other things. And to put myself in Job's position, you know, that you could lose literally everything and then say, blessed be the name of the Lord. It really gives you a window into his heart. And also, we're constantly checking ourselves versus the word. How would I do in this situation? And this is one of those things that we can really think about. By the way, there's something that's very interesting here. Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I will return there. On face value, that looks very strange, since you can't go back to your mother's womb. What we should know is that the earth, almost like we think of Mother Earth, the Bible and the belief system in the ancient Near East was that it was, you know, God's blessing on the earth, that the earth gave all abundance. And so in kind of an interesting way, the female womb was connected to the earth, or thought to be connected in ways to the earth. This would be kind of a mysterious or mystical way. It's not really a logical way, but it's just like that the earth is where that gives birth to all of our food and all of our blessing, and women give birth to children and that blessing. And as we've excavated now thousands and thousands of graves in the Middle East, an interesting phenomenon is that a number of people are buried in a fetal position, like they have gone back to the womb. And so this is a little more literal here than we might think when Job says, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I will return there. That had a more logical connection in his mind than it does in ours. And then he says, Yahweh is taken away. Yahweh gave and Yahweh is taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. And I was thinking in light of Thanksgiving and giving in response to his thankfulness, it was intriguing to me that Joyce, first in your prophecy, you said, freely I gave, freely give as I have given to you. And then Greg, in your manifestation, freely you've received, freely give. Then it really hit me that so much of Thanksgiving, an expression of Thanksgiving, is giving to others. And twice tonight, the Lord reminded us, he has given to us. Don't be stingy. You know, in the Bible, when the Bible talks about the evil eye, is the evil eye processed through Roman culture and into modern, say, Italian culture. The evil eye is an eye that casts curses or something. Biblically, the phrase the evil eye referred to being stingy. And that's why it says if your eye is evil, your body is full of darkness. Why is that? Because if you're stingy, you're just dark on the inside. You're fearful, you're closed in, you're holding on to everything. It says, but if your eye is hoplotes, it's singly minded on God, then your whole body is full of light. So we don't want to be stingy. And here's Job, and he's lost everything. And yet he says, blessed be the name of Yahweh. And then verse 22 says, in all this Job did not sin, nor did he charge God with wrongdoing, which in his culture at his time period, 4,000 years ago, about 2000 BC, they didn't know about Satan and his kingdom and the juxtaposition of Satan and God. And Job really didn't charge God with wrongdoing, even though he said Yahweh is taken away. If you and I said that, it would be in ignorance of what Christ taught, what the New Testament revealed, and it would be conceivable that we would be in wrong for saying that. Let's go to Job chapter 2. So now Job is dealing with his stuff on earth. Verse 2, and again, there was a day when the sons of God, the created beings of God, came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan also came among them to present himself before Yahweh. Verse 2, and Yahweh said to Satan, I like this again, where have you come from? Satan answered the same thing, from going back and forth on the earth, from walking up and down in it. Verse 3, then Yahweh said to Satan, and note here that here Yahweh, even in Job's state, takes the time to point out to Satan about Job. And that tells us something here, that Yahweh really delights in Job. Look what he says, have you considered my servant Job? For there is none like him in the earth, a blameless and upright man. He's still blameless and upright, one who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds on to his integrity, although you incited me against him to ruin him without cause. Put pressure on the phrase without cause. Again, Job is innocent. He's righteous. Just because somebody has something terrible happen to them or they're disadvantaged does not necessarily mean that they did anything wrong or had anything, that they could have corrected or whatever. But the fact that that Yahweh specifically takes time to point out Job shows how much Yahweh delights in Job. And Yahweh delights in Job in chapter 1 and in chapter 2, not because he's wealthy, not because of his children, not because he's taking care of his to be the family priest or whatever, but because he's blameless and upright and he fears God and he avoids evil. And I think that's something we can do no matter what our situation is. Rich or poor, healthy or sick, we can hold on to our integrity. We can turn away from evil. We can continue to pray and bless God and be a delight to God. Now, Satan here in verse 4 could have said, well, God, I was wrong. I said that Job would curse you and he didn't. Fat chance. Satan is never going to admit he's wrong. He's going to push further into evil. It's important that we know this because Satan's people are exactly the same way. Sometimes, I just catch myself and I wonder, gosh, I wonder how much evil they have to do before they'd be satisfied. The answer is total annihilation. They're never satisfied, ever. They'd be happy if every human being on earth were completely dead. So Satan just pushes deeper. He says, skin for skin, yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. Stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. Verse 6, and Yahweh said to Satan, behold, he's in your hand, but spare his life. And again, verse 7, so Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh and struck Job with painful sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Again, we see Satan being the cause of sickness and disease, and we certainly see that in the life of Christ. And Acts 10:38 says that Christ went around healing those who were oppressed of the devil. And we know that a kingdom that is against itself can't stand. God couldn't make people sick and then send Christ to heal him. God's kingdom would fall apart. Satan is an independent being. he oppresses people. God in Christ try to help people. So Satan made Job sick, like he makes so many people sick. Verse 8, Job took for himself a potsherd to scrape himself with, and he sat among the ashes, which was a sign of mourning. Verse 9, then his wife said to him, do you still hold on to your integrity? Curse God and die. In other words, basically just, get out of your misery, just curse God and die. And verse 10, but he said to her, you're speaking like one of the godless women would speak. The word godless in a lot of versions is translated foolish. It's the Hebrew word nabal. It's the godless fool. It's the most intense word for fool in the Hebrew language, and it refers to the fool like in the Psalms where it says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. That's the nabal fool. He is a godless person. So we put the emphasis here on godlessness. And godless people would, are you holding on to your integrity? Curse God. That's speaking like a godless person. And then Job says, what? Should we accept good at the hand of God and not accept evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. This is a difficult phrase to translate because the word accept is the same word as the word receive. So you will look at the different versions, and some of them say, can we receive good at the hand of God and not receive evil? And others say, should we accept good at the hand of God but not accept evil? And actually, the difficulty from a Bible student's point of view is that both meanings are true here. This is a true amphibologia. Both statements are true. We could actually conflate this in an expanded version to say, should we receive and accept good at the hand of God, but not receive and accept evil? Because we do receive good from God. We also accept good from God. Where Job was coming from in his time period, you received evil from God and you accepted evil from God. As we looked at this, we thought the greater emphasis was on accept, because reception is passive. You just take what God gives you, where here Job's talking about his wife's attitude and not just what she gets, but how she feels about what she gets. And so here what Job is saying very simply, should we accept good from God? Like, yay, God. But then when evil comes along, we're not going to accept that. So that's the way he would translate this. And then again, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. That's where Job was coming from. So again, this wonderful thanksgiving, this integrity that ran through his life, this ability to stay faithful to God in difficult circumstances. Phenomenal example as we go into Thanksgiving week and thinking about what we have to be thankful for. None of us has escaped sin. None of us has escaped problems. Some of us are currently dealing with physical problems. Some of us are physically healthy, but have other things that we're dealing with. Like I say, nobody's escaped sin. And like Job, we reflect on the goodness of God, on the joy that's set before us. And here we are in a week of Thanksgiving, and we're in a great position to be thankful and be a model to others. Verse 11, now when Job's 3 friends heard of all the evil that had come on him, they each came from his own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite, and they made an appointment together to show him sympathy and comfort him. Now, that's kind of interesting. They're gonna show him sympathy and comfort him, but they show up with their theology, which is wrong, and so they end up being hurtful. This is great, because this is what happens to people in many situations. Their intention is good, but their theology ends up being hurtful. And we've just got to know the truth and be able to straighten, get that straightened out. Verse 12, when they lifted up their eyes from a distance and did not recognize him, he'd shaved his head, he was sitting in ashes, he had sores all over his body. They raised their voices and wept. They each tore his robe, sprinkled dust on their heads toward the heavens. Verse 13, so they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great, chapter 3. And it certainly was. Chapter 3, verse 1, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And I'm not going to go over this speech, but basically, you've now had a man that's probably been in pain for several months. His kids have been, I mean, because it would take, these three guys a while to even just reach him, even after they heard about him, which would take some time. And so if any of you have been in chronic pain for any number of days, you know how that can affect your mind, tear down at your emotions. And so here Job curses the day of his birth. It's an emotion he's feeling. It's very real. He puts a voice to it. Later on, he will be able to control it. But this, whenever you're dealing with somebody who's in intense pain and they just have an emotional outburst like this that doesn't make any sense, it doesn't fit with their personality, it's not theologically true, we just let it go. Pain and pressure cause a lot of human emotion, and we've just got to make room for that. God created us in his image as emotional beings. And in sometimes in very difficult situations, our emotions get the best of us. It's probably better to voice the emotions, get them out, recognize them for what they are, and later in a more rational time, be able to deal with them or talk them through, or you might even just say, wow, I just wasn't myself, and amen, and let it go. And then if we go to Job chapter 4, we see the first of Job's friends, Eliphaz, and I'm not going to go through all the friends and all their speeches, but we can get a good taste of what's going on from the three friends, even by just starting to read chapter 4. In verse 1, then Eliphaz the Temanite answered, if someone ventures to talk with you, will you be offended? Now, why would he open up that way? Why would he open up that way? Well, because he's going to blame Job for his problems. And so he's going to say, well, okay, if I'm honest about what I believe about you, are you going to be offended? Of course, it turns out that Job was offended, and with good reason, but then Eliphaz says, but who can withhold himself from speaking? And he goes on in verse 3, you've instructed many. And you go down to verse 7, consider now, who being innocent has ever perished, or where were the upright ever cut off? And so what's he doing here? He's blaming Job. Now, we don't know a lot about where people got their theology back, 2,000 years before Christ. But this opening speech by Eliphaz is very revealing. So let's take a look at it. So where did he get his theology? Verse 12. Now a word was brought to me stealthily. My ear received a whisper of it. And already you're thinking, okay, so Eliphaz gets his theology by revelation. It came stealthily. Verse 13, amid disquieting thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, fear came on me and trembling, which made all my bones shake. So now if this was an angel from God, what do they always open up with? Fear not this guy. He says, then a spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. Now we're going to be able to tell from the context here, this is a demon. This is a demon that came into concretion. A spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. Verse 16, it stood still, but I couldn't discern its appearance. Very typical of demonic things. They operate out of darkness. A form was before my eyes. There was silence. Then I heard a voice. Can mortal man be more just than God? Can a man be more pure than his maker? Behold, he puts no trust in his servants. That would be his angels, by the way, if you're God. He charges his angels with error. Is that true? Well, if you're a demon, it is. If you're a demon, you think, oh, well, God has charged me with error. No kidding. You know, you got the boot from God's throne area, you know, verse 19. So he charges his angels with error. How much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed before the moth. In other words, even a moth could walk on you and crush you. Verse 30. Between morning and evening, they are destroyed. They perish forever without any regarding it. Really? Really? God doesn't regard it when people died? You got a spirit that comes to you and say God doesn't think about it when you die? Does that sound like an angel? Does that sound like God? I wouldn't think so. Who does it sound like? Sounds like a demon. Yep. They perish forever without any regarding that. That's exactly how demons feel. Verse 21, is not their tent cord plucked up within them? They die, and that without wisdom. And that's exactly, so basically here's Eliphaz, and he he goes naked right in front of God and everybody and just says basically, if we've got discerning eyes and ears, he just says, hey, I got my theology from a demon. Okay, cool. Well, we know where he's coming from. No wonder Job's going to have problems with him. Let's go over to Job chapter 6. In Job chapter 6, verse 24. We'll just read a couple verses here because now Job has gone through Eliphaz, and Eliphaz hasn't really done anything except accuse Job of evil, which is the same thing that Bildad does and Zophar, whatever, accuse Job of evil. Verse 24, Job says, teach me and I'll hold my peace. Make me understand how I have erred. That's a reasonable request. And they couldn't do it. Verse 25, this is a cool verse. How painful are honest words. That's really true. Sometimes we need to, here's another lesson in Job that I didn't even write down. Sometimes we need to be honest with people, and sometimes those words are painful. And you can't mince around that. Sometimes as ministers of the gospel, just as loving human beings, we have to have conversations with people that are painful. But, it is what it is. Sometimes honest words are painful, but then Job says, but your reproof, what does it reprove? You're wrong. Verse 26, do you consider your words as a reproof, but the speech of one who is in despair, meaning me, Job, to be only as the wind? It's just like, the wind blowing, just noise. And then he goes on from there. Verse 28, now therefore be pleased to look at me, for surely I would not lie to your face. Please reconsider, don't be unjust. Yes, reconsider, my cause is righteous. And of course, we know from Job that was true. And then you read through Job, and it's pretty much a play of this over and over again until you get into the later chapters when God shows up and God just basically says, Job, you're not going to understand what's going on. I'm God. There's a lot of things in life you don't understand, and you're not going to understand about how life and death is going on the face of the earth. And even today, we don't have an understanding of all those things. We have a big picture that God is good and the devil is evil, but why this bad thing happens or this good thing happens, we don't really know. Ecclesiastes says aging and chance happen to everybody, and they do. And eventually all this stuff will get sorted out at the day of judgment. So this is Job, who maintained his integrity throughout his terrible ordeal, and God rebuilt his life. At the end of his life, he had more children. He got his wealth back. He became respectable and well known, and saw his children for many generations. And I think then that he becomes a model for us of someone that can hold on to integrity and be thankful. And we can certainly do that in this Thanksgiving week. Thank you for being with me and your attention. And, I love this fellowship, and you guys are wonderful. And it's great to see your faces. And thank you I hope you enjoyed this teaching as much as I enjoyed looking at Job again and doing the work behind it.